Hey everyone, I'm excited to be bringing you the tutorial for the Coupeville Tote today. This is a new pattern release from Oro Rosa Patterns. This is the first tote pattern that they have released, and this is a really fun one. It can be quilted, it can be left unquilted, and however you want to approach it, you can really get a great unique bag. The style of this bag is like something I've never seen before. When I first saw the picture of it, I was completely blown away. The handles are beautiful. The quilting is amazing. It's a great size without being too big. It's got a phone pocket on the outside. It's got 2 slip pockets and a zipper pocket on the inside. A really sizable main compartment with a zipper closure. It can be hand carried from the beautiful unique handles or as a crossbody if you want to put the crossbody strap on. It's got these really neat decorative connectors on the side, and it's just a really beautiful bag, and it's achievable. I sewed mine on my domestic Juki machine, so it can be done on a domestic. There are some parts that are a little bulky and a little tricky. I will walk you through all of those, but it was really fun. I'm so excited to be bringing this to you, and I hope that you will enjoy making your own Coupeville Tote. So let's get going. We're going to be starting at step 8 with the connectors and the strap. So I'm assuming that all of your pieces are cut and interfaced per the initial part of the pattern instructions. We're going to first of all grab the upper connectors. You should have your interfacing on the back of those, and you'll need a ruler and a pen. If you haven't already, draw a line down the center of that connector piece over the top of your fused Deckerville. We're then going to just taper the side slightly. We're just trimming a little section off the corner there. Grab your double-sided tape, and we're going to put a strip down the middle, and then we're going to fold the long edges in to meet the line that we just drew. When you're folding the tapered edge, you're just going to turn that end slightly so that you get this taper, and that will help when we fold the connector piece to keep that edge nice and tucked in. We're going to sew around the edge of these strap connectors, but before I head over to the machine, I'm going to take the decorative connectors. If you aren't doing the decorative connectors, then you can skip this step. But if you are, we're going to do a double fold on these. So we're going to draw a line down the center of this as well. And again, take your double-sided tape. Because we're only going to be sewing down one side of this, I'm not concerned about the double-sided tape in the middle because we won't be sewing on this part. Take the tape off. Starting at the center, fold in to meet that drawn line. Because we're doing a double fold on this side, I'm just going to stop slightly short just to leave a tiny gap there for when we fold it over. And then I will fold that in half again and clip that in place. And repeat for the second connector. Now I'm going to go and sew those 4 pieces, the 2 D-ring connectors and the 2 optional decorative connectors. Just starting my back stitching in the short end of the connector using a Teflon foot and a long stitch length. And repeat for the second connector. And now I'm just going to sew down this open side of the decorative connector strap. The double-sided tape is here at this edge, so I won't be sewing through any of my double-sided tape here where the fold is, but because it is 4 layers, I am going to increase my tension. and then just sewing straight up the one side. Tidy up those threads, and then we're going to get to work on preparing our strap. The first thing we're going to do is draw a line down the center of our strap. The strap is 4 inches wide, so that line is going to be 2 inches from the long end. And just draw that straight down the middle. We're then going to grab our double-sided tape, and we are going to put a line of double-sided tape along the full length of the strap on either side of that line that we just drew. If you are using a stretchier material for your strap, like a stretchier vinyl or a leather, you may want to put a strip of stabilizer just in one small section of the strap so that it doesn't stretch with use. I'm going to put a strip of 3/4 of an inch cross grain ribbon just down one end, keeping it out of the seam allowance to help stabilize this vinyl. We now need to do the double fold for our strap to enclose these raw ends here. The way that we do that is by folding towards the center line and then the center line again, and then we will fold it in half to enclose the raw edges. I like to start in the middle of my strap. Peel off the double-sided tape on one side, and then starting approximately in the center, I'm going to fold directly across to the line that we drew, but not over the line, just coming up to meet that line, or even slightly short of the line for when we do the second fold. And go from the center out to the edge, making sure that I'm folding straight across and that I'm not twisting my strap at all. And press that down onto the double-sided tape. You can press that down a little with your seam roller just to keep that in place while we fold the other side in. Just making sure that it's nice and straight. If you need to, you can pop a few clips on there just to keep it folded over while we continue to work. Flip it around. We're just going to fold this side over about 1/16 of an inch away from the first side, starting in the center again and working our way out. With that tiny gap there, it would just help us be able to fold that final fold to enclose that raw seam. And then folding it once again. I like to start in the center each time, just to reduce the likelihood of any twists or skewing in my crossbody strap. Grab some clips, and we're just clipping the folded edges together, making sure that it is stuck down at that double-sided tape in the middle. And now that we have the raw ends all folded into the center, we are going to go and sew this entire strap. A couple of things to note when you are sewing a vinyl strap. I like to use a walking foot so that I get an even feed of all of the layers as I go through my sewing machine. If you don't have a walking foot, then you're going to want to sew down one entire side and then flip your strap back around and over, and then sew the same direction down the second side to reduce your twisting. You will likely need to increase your tension so that you get an even stitch since you're going through so many layers compared to other parts of your sewing. And use a longer stitch length on your top stitching, and also make sure that you have enough thread in your bobbin so that you don't run out in the middle of your project. To get a nice even stitch line, I like to look to see approximately where 1/8 of an inch is lining up with part of my presser foot so that I can get an even line all the way around my strap. And make sure if you're using a walking foot that the end of the strap is not catching on part of that walking foot as you go through. And if you aren't using a walking foot, then right now I would finish my stitches here, and then I would come back to this end and sew down here rather than go around like a big rectangle. Now that strap is done, we just tie those threads off and then either trim them or tuck them in. We're now going to work on our handles. Grab your double-sided tape, a pen, and a ruler. First, we're going to run a strip of double-sided tape along each of these edges. We're now going to measure and draw a line that is approximately 3/8 of an inch from the edge of this stabilizer piece. And repeat that for both sides of both handles. These lines do not have to be exact, they're just so that we don't cut too close to the main part of the handle when we're snipping in to fold the vinyl around the curve. Grab your scissors. We're going to cut slits up to this drawn line around the curve of the handle. We're now going to remove the double-sided tape and fold this edge right over to wrap it around the stabilizer piece. And press it down onto that double-sided tape. The little snips just allow for that vinyl to curve around that part of the handle. Then fold the handles together and clip along the open edge. And now we're going to sew around the edges of this strap. When you're sewing around the edges of your handle, it is quite thick. It's 4 layers of vinyl and 2 layers of deck fill that you're going to be sewing through. So just take it slow. If you need to compress your strap a little in a cold heat press or under some heavy books or something to make it a little easier, that could help with all of the layers. But just take it slow and use a longer stitch length so that you can get around your strap. You may find too that using a hump jumper just underneath the presser foot will help you with the bulk to keep your presser foot a little flatter. Now I'm going to sew down the folded side of the strap. I'm going to flip it over and come from the same direction. Back stitching in the end seam allowance. and then pivoting and top stitching straight down this side. And then repeating for the other handle. We can now get organized into packs. Pack 1, the strap. Pack 2, main exterior. Pack 3, top trim, handles, and zipper panels. Pack 4, slip pocket. Pack 5, zippered pocket. And pack 6, finishing touches. Grab all of the components of pack 1 and we are now going to build our strap. The first thing that we need to do is slide one end through our slider. Have a look at your strap and observe your stitches and see if they look even on both sides or if there is the side you would prefer to have as the back of your strap. And whichever side you determine to be the back, start with that side up. You're going to grab your slider. Ideally, it would be a chunkier, wider slider than this. This is what I had on hand, so this is what I will be using. You're going to take your slider and you're going to put one end through your slider piece and then back down through the top. Because sometimes these strap ends can be a little bit tricky to put through the hardware, we're going to put the strap end on after we've threaded our strap through that swivel. But with that on, we're going to now install this strap end. If you have one of the clamp types, you would just put it on and then squeeze it shut. Mine is a screw-in one, so I'm just going to slide that over my stitches there very carefully so that it's in the middle of my strap end. And then I'm just going to screw my little screws into those holes there. I like to apply just a tiny bit of thread locker onto my screws, and then I just will pick them up with a pair of pliers with a piece of scrap there to protect my workspace. Just pop that into place there, and then I can screw that in. Start it off first. And then once I've got both in place, I can screw them down all the way. And then just making sure to wipe any excess off. Then we can fold this over. And we're going to punch a hole for our rivet. I like to do 2 rivets, but you can just do 1. I like to pop a clip there and then punch my hole. Being careful of where we just applied that strap, and you can measure or you can just eyeball it. Punch 1 hole through all of the layers there. Pop the first rivet in, and then we can pop our second one if you're going to do a second one. Then I will go and set those rivets. We now have the slider pot set. Grab one of your swivels and put it over the other open end and slide it up to where the fold is. Then we're going to feed it through this slider, which encloses this part of our strap in the middle of that loop. Put it back through the top. Grab your other swivel and slide that on. And then with that out of the way, we're going to put our other strap end on. This being the back of the strap. If you have one that you screw on, you're going to have it screw side up. Tuck it all the way in, and then the same way as we did at the other end, just screw in those screws. We've got our other strap end on. Slide your swivel back up here. Fold that over. If you're doing one rivet, you can punch that hole. If you're doing two, slide it a little further up. The same as we did at the other end. Pop a clip on to hold it in place. Then we're going to punch our 2 holes or our 1 hole and set those rivets. With that strap completed, we can move on to pack 2. Grab your pack 2, the main exterior. If you are not going to be quilting your exterior, then you can skip ahead through this part. If you are going to be quilting, then I'm going to show you how we go about that. Working from the exterior that doesn't have the cutout, the first thing we need to do is mark the center points. I have them marked here with this silver pen, and I'm also going to put a small slit where those marks are so that they will still be there later, as we'll need them when we're putting the bag together. And we're now going to mark our lines for our quilting. Grab your ruler, and we're going to draw a line where each of the quilting lines is going to go. The pattern of the quilting has us drawing a line 1.5 inches up from the slightly longer edge of this exterior piece, that is the bottom, and drawing a line straight along from one edge to the other. With my particular vinyl, it's quite hard to see my removable marking pen, so I'm going to show you a different way to do that. But if you have a material that you can see your pen on, then you can just continue on doing the markings 1.5 inches and then 3/8 of an inch up from that line, and then 1.5 inches again, and so on until you get all the way up to the top of your bag. The way that I'm going to do it is using this painter's tape. This is 3/8 of an inch wide painter's tape. And I'm going to grab this silver marking pen and put a line 1.5 inches up from that bottom line, just a little tiny mark in the seam allowance. And then what I'm going to do is lay my painter's tape along this line. I'm going to use my ruler to make sure that that's nice and even. Adjust it if necessary. And that then creates both lines. I've got the 1.5 inch line on the bottom, and then I've got my 3/8 of an inch line at the top there. And what I'm now going to do is repeat that pattern, measuring 1.5 inches up from the upper edge of that tape and putting my tape down here. But again, if you have a material that you can see your lines on, then you can just simply draw your line in here. And then the second line will be 3/8 of an inch above that line, and that will give you your correct spacing for your quilting lines. I'm going to repeat that pattern all the way up the exterior. If you've been drawing all of your lines in, you can go ahead and also draw your vertical lines, starting at the center and working your way out. Because I am using the painter's tape, I need to go and sew my horizontal lines before I can place the tape to do the markings for my vertical lines. So I'm going to go ahead and do that, and then we will come back to sew the vertical lines. When we're quilting, we're going to be sewing on both sides of this double-sided tape, or if you have drawn in your lines, you're going to be sewing on each drawn line to create a pattern that is 1.5 inches and then 3/8 of an inch. We're going to go all the way from one end to the other and back stitch. You can sew these sections around to avoid having to stop and start as many times. I recommend keeping your back stitching in your seam allowance. I'm using a walking foot to help my layers feed through, and a longer stitch length. And then I will just repeat that for each of those sets of lines. I'm just now going to peel away that tape, but I'm not going to get rid of it. I'm going to set it aside to reuse it to do the vertical lines. Going back to our center markings that we made before, we're now going to measure 3/4 of an inch to either side and then place our lines there. Again, if you're using a pen to mark your lines, you're going to put your first line here and then your second line 3/8 of an inch beyond that, working your way out from the center. And now I'll go and sew on either side of these vertical lines the same way as we did for the horizontal lines. Couple of things to consider as you're doing your quilting. Make sure that you have enough thread in your bobbin. I ran out of bobbin thread over here and I had to refill my bobbin. And also, if you are having trouble with inconsistent stitch length because of the extra layers, or if you're using a thicker thread, I'm using a Mora 70 thread and usually I use a Mora 100. By switching to a bigger needle, you may find that you get more consistent stitch length when you're doing your quilting. And also keep note of the balancing of your stitches and adjust your tension if you need to make sure that you're getting a nice, even stitch and you cannot see that bobbin thread from the top of your fabric. Pull all of your threads tight, and then you can put fray check, you can tie them, you can melt them, you can snip them if you're confident in the amount of back stitching that you've done. And then if you use the painter's tape method, just peel that painter's tape off. If you did your top stitching on the drawn lines, then you're ready to move on to the second exterior panel. And then I'm going to go ahead and repeat that for the second side. If you are going to use the painter's tape method, then you can use your cutting mat also, and that may help you align your tape a little more easily without having to keep shifting your ruler. And when it comes to this final line at the top of the exterior panel that has the phone pocket, you can decide if you want to sew both lines there or just have the single line of the quilting, because once we top stitch this pocket here, that line of top stitching will come quite close or overlap with the top line of your quilting here. So it's up to personal preference whether you want to have that sewn or not. Take your completed main panel with the cutout and also your phone pocket lining. You're going to place the lining piece face down on your exterior panel, lining up this cutout. Grab some clips and clip that in place. We're now going to go and sew around this edge at 3/8 of an inch. Clip your threads and then cut some small snips into the curve without cutting through the top stitching from your quilting. The snips are going to help us turn out this pocket and have a nice smooth corner. Then fold that lining pocket over. I like to push this top edge right out. I'll just pop a clip to keep that in place. Repeat on the other side. Finger press that down, and then we're going to go and we're going to top stitch around this edge here. Making sure that your lining for that foam pocket is rolled under so that you can't see it from the front of the bag. I like to start my top stitching in this seam allowance here and then come around the entire opening. Sewing at 1/8 of an inch. Taking it nice and slow around that curve. I do 2 stitches at a time and then pivot to get a nice gradual top stitch around that curved piece. Finger pressing as I go to keep that pocket lining well tucked in. If you have a stiletto or an awl, you can just use that to just coax that top corner out as you sew around that last little bit. And then back stitching again in that top seam allowance. Take your foam pocket backing and you're going to lay that down on that lining piece. Clip around the 3 edges here, leaving the top open, and then we're going to sew around that at 3/8 of an inch. As you move between the varying thicknesses, make sure that your tension is set correctly and that your stitch length is also the way that it should be. Sewing down this side, and then we'll continue around the bottom and up the other side at 3/8 of an inch using your shorter construction stitch length. We're now just going to trim the seam allowances here, and then we will baste that pocket in place at the top of the exterior. And then basting at the top here with 2 rows of stitches to keep that foam pocket in place. If you're wanting to quilt the base of your bag, you would go ahead and do that now. This is again an optional step, but it does have the added bonus of securing your stabilizer to the base of your bag really well. If you are going to add purse feet to your bag, measure in from the short end, 2.5 inches, and then mark 1 3/8 of an inch from the top and the bottom, and the same on the other side. Once you have those marks made, depending on the type of purse feet that you're using, you may need to punch a hole or make a small slit to put your purse feet through. I like to make sure that the prong or the stem of the purse foot fits through from the wrong side before I poke it through from the right side. And that way I'm not going to be fighting with a hole that is too small and potentially damaging the bottom of my bag. Make sure that you're using a piece of stabilizer beneath your purse feet and your bag base. And then cover up the prongs with some duct tape. Grab a ruler and a pen, and we are going to mark the corners of the bag base. Measure in 3/8 of an inch from the short and long end to make a square at the corner. and repeat on each corner. Take your main panel piece and working from the bottom, which is the end that is slightly wider, you're going to be lining up the center of your base with the center of your main panel. I'm going to clip that in place. At this point, I like to double check my measurements to make sure that the measurement at this end from where I've made my mark to the edge of the bag is the same as this side to the edge of my bag. Then we're going to go and sew just between the two lines that we just made at 3/8 of an inch, sewing the bottom to the main panel right sides together. Back stitching at the start. And stopping at that line that we drew. Trim your threads, and we are also going to put a small snip through the exterior of the bag up to the stitch line that we just made. Turn your bag over, and where this line ends, we're just going to put a small snip straight up to that line, taking care not to snip the threads, just through the exterior of the bag. This is going to help us form the base shape. Just through the exterior, not through the base and not through the line of stitches. We now need to top stitch the base. To keep the main lining panel out of the way, you can fold it up, and you can see how it folds easily where we made that snip. So fold it up and just pop a clip to keep that up out of the way. And then we are going to be top stitching through the base. When we top stitch, we're sewing through the base from one end to the other, and at this point, we will be sewing through the folded over base, and then from where we made the snip, we will also be sewing through the main panel. However, this part is going to stay out of the way. Sewing all the way along this edge and back stitching. So again, just to clarify, we are going to be sewing through the base 2 layers when it is folded over and the main panel just between those 2 lines. So when you fold it over, keep the main lining panel folded out of the way up to the point where we made that snip, and then sewing down this edge, including both the main lining panel and the folded base. Check that your settings are adjusted correctly, and you may need to increase your tension because of the number of layers that we're sewing through here. And I like to just put a slight bit of tension on that seam there just to get a nice flat fold, which helps me get an even top stitch. And when you come to the end, making sure again that at this point where we've made that snip, the exterior panel is folded out of the way, and then we go from sewing through the seam allowance, including the main panel, to just the base of the bag. Double check that you have not caught any of your main lining panel in that top stitching, and then we will turn it around and repeat the other side. Take the lining panel that has the foam pocket attached, and you're going to line the center of the base panel up with the center of that panel and clip that in place. Double check those measurements to make sure that it's even. And then we're going to go and sew at 3/8 of an inch between these 2 markings, and then we will top stitch. This seam is now sewn at 3/8 of an inch just between the lines that we drew, and we're now going to put our snips into the main panel just up to where that line is, not snipping any of those threads. And then we will fold this out in the same way as we did on the other side, keeping the main panel piece out of the way. Folding this over here, we're going to be sewing through all of these layers here, top stitching, but not through this part of the main lining panel, and sewing from the very end here all the way down to the end here and back stitching. Double check that you haven't put any of that main panel in your top stitching, and we can then move on to pack 3. Take your trim pieces from your pack 3 and check that you have your stabilizer pieces in place on the back of both trim pieces. Take your trim piece and align it with the edge of your main panel. Clip that into place. We're then going to sew the top trim in place using a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. Trim back the seam allowance just through the top trim panel, then fold it open and top stitch. Taking care not to snip into your main panel or any of the threads from your quilting. Fold the trim panel out, and we will be top stitching along this edge here. Often when I top stitch, I like to start my top stitching in the seam allowance at the side and then turn my project 90 degrees to sew along the edge. However, because we will be trimming through the bulk here to reduce the bulk in our side seam, I'm not going to be starting my top stitching in the side seam. I'm just going to start it in the usual line of stitches. And repeat those steps for the opposite main panel. Particularly when working on this second top trim piece, you may find that it is difficult to have the bulk of your bag in the throat of your machine, so you may need to top stitch from the other side compared to what you would normally do. One of the trickier parts to sew, especially if you are working on a domestic like I am, is this little bump here where the edge of the pocket is. So you can use a hump jumper to support your presser foot as it comes down off that bump. But if, like mine, it has skipped the stitch there, something else you can do to correct that is just grab a hand sewing needle and a piece of matching thread and just pop it through. And then we will just manually place that stitch. Just put the loop of thread around the missed stitch, then thread both threads through the eye of your needle, and then find the hole that the machine made. Put your needle straight through that hole and pull it through to the back, and then that will pull that stitch into the fabric, and you can tie that off from the back, and that will create that stitch there, so it will no longer have the appearance of the skip stitch. And you just tie that off from the back and trim. Take one of your handle pieces, and we're going to measure 1 1/4 inches from either end of that top trim piece. Take your handle in this orientation with the curve at the bottom and the straight edge at the top. And then the edge that is straight is going to line up with the mark that we just made. Line up the tip with the 1 1/4 inch mark and clip that in place. Then take the other end of your handle, making the straight side curved over and lining up this wide edge with the other mark. Turn the bag around and repeat the placement for the other side. You may find it easier to base the first handle in place before you place the second handle. But so that I only have to go over to the machine once, I'm going to clip both my handles in place, and then I'm going to go and baste them. So 1 1/4 inches from the edge, which is the narrower end of the top trim piece. When the top trim piece was attached, we had the wider edge at the bottom, narrower at the top. Those marks in place. Take your other handle, position so that the curved side is down and the straight side is up in this orientation. Clip, the point meets up with the mark, clip that in place, fold the handle over, line up the point with that mark on the other side, clip that in place, and then we will baste the handle here, here, and also here and here. Basting that in place at 1/8 of an inch. Set the main part of your bag aside and grab your zipper panels and your 14-inch zipper. You'll also need a lighter and a straight pin. The first thing that I like to do when getting my zipper ready is just make sure that the ends of my zipper are even. I'm just going to neaten these up. Then I take a look at the back end of the zipper, and I'm just going to make a mark to see which end the teeth are sticking further out on. And on my zipper, it is on the right side. So I'm just going to put a little snip in that zipper there so that I know when I am putting my pull back on which side I should start from. Now you can separate out your zipper. Go to the end that will be the turned end, so not the end that we marked. And you're going to put a fold in the zipper, straight over. And then fold the top corner out to the side to create a 90-degree fold in your zipper, and on the back, a fold at 45 degrees. Take your pin, or if you prefer, you can use a clip. You're going to slide that pin into the zipper tape to keep that fold in place. With that fold held in place, take your lighter, and you're going to melt the raw end of that zipper, and then using your fingers or a pair of pliers, just press that zipper tape in place, which will keep that fold in position. And then repeat for the other end of the zipper, making sure when you do it that you're doing it on the correct end of the zipper. So take a look at your teeth, make sure they are pointing in the same direction, and do the same fold. Folding over, pinching, creating that 90-degree fold at the front and that 45-degree angle at the back, using your straight pin to keep the fold in place, and then melting that zipper end to fix that turn in your zipper. Before I go any further with my zipper panels, I just like to check that my teeth alignment is correct. So just slide on your zipper pull, starting from the side that we marked, slide the pull on, pinch it between your thumb and forefinger, keeping the tooth just inside the zipper head. Take the other side of the zipper tape and slide it up to meet that tooth, and when you feel them click together, just going to pull the right-hand side down until the teeth click into place, and then push the base of the zipper. Make sure that your teeth are lining up. If there's any skipped teeth, you just want to start again, making sure that the tooth that is further out is the tooth that is on the side that we marked. And once you've got them lined up, slide your pull all the way to the end. Make sure that you're happy with the alignment at the end of your zipper. You know that they're even, and confirm that you will still be starting from this side. The reason that I check it here is that when you take these turns at the end, sometimes it could be off a little bit one side compared to the other, and that will change where you would need to start from. But by doing that check, we know that we're right to start from the side that we marked earlier, and that our zipper will be nice and even. If you have some waves in your zipper, like this one has a little bit of wave in it, you can just iron that to make sure that you get a really good zipper install. So take that pull off, and we're going to get our zipper panels ready. Place your zipper panels so that they are wrong side up on your surface, and put a piece of double-sided tape parallel to the short end at both ends of your zipper panels. Peel off that double-sided tape and fold the short end around over the stabilizer piece and press that in place. With those ends folded, the two panels should be the same length. With your zipper panels right side up and your two pieces of zipper tape, as well as some clips, we're first going to fold a zipper panel in half and place a clip at the end to hold the edges in place well lined up. We're then going to take our folded zipper tape and lining up the raw edge of the zipper with this raw edge of our panel. We're just going to slide it in, pushing it up into the fold, and place a clip. We're then going to line the edge of that zipper tape up all the way along that raw edge and continue to clip that into place, nestling it in between the layers of that folded zipper panel. Making sure that the raw edges are all lining up together and clipped into place. We're then going to repeat that for the second side of the zipper, making sure that it will be mirrored to the first side. First, fold your zipper panel in half, and then again, tucking the zipper in between the layers with the raw side lining up with the raw long edge here, this time with the teeth facing down, pushing it right up into the fold, lining up all the raw edges, and then clipping that in place. When you are happy with your placement of the zipper tape within the zipper panel, just double check that your zippers are opposite to each other. So at this stage, you should have two folded zipper panels with the wrong side out, with your zippers hanging at the end, with the raw end facing towards the center and the teeth are facing to the outside. The reason that they're currently facing to the outside is that once we turn the zipper panels out the right way, the teeth will be sitting the correct way in that zipper panel. Now we're going to go and sew along this edge of our zipper. Sewing along the edge of the zipper at 3/8 of an inch, being sure to back stitch at the end. And then repeat for the second panel. Trim away your threads and then trim away the seam allowance of the zipper panel without cutting into your zipper tape. Trim the corners here also, just in the seam allowance where it is folded. And we're then going to turn the zipper panels out. Take your preferred corner poking tool and just poke that end where the zipper is turned out to make a nice sharp corner. Double check that your zipper panels are mirrored, and then using a seam roller or a hammer, press the fold here. And now we're going to top stitch around these 3 edges, starting at the open edge, working our way around to the other end here for both panels. Starting at one short end, we are now going to top stitch around the entire zipper panel at 1/8 of an inch using our longer stitch length. Because of the layers where it's folded here, you may need to increase your tension to get a nice balanced stitch. I like to just pull gently on the zipper teeth to keep the fold nice and flat as I sew along the edge of the zipper panel. And then back stitching again. And repeat for the second zipper panel. We now need to baste our zipper panels in place. Mark the center of both panels. I am marking the center on both the top and the bottom of the panel just within the seam allowance. Take the exterior of your bag and mark the center between the handle attachments. When we're basting on our zipper panel, we need to consider how we want the zipper to open on our finished bag. When the bag is finished, the zipper panel will sit like this in the middle of the bag. We have to decide if we want this side to be the pocket side or this side to be the plain side. I like my zippers to open from left to right when the bag is facing me, and I consider the pocket side to be the back. So I'm going to work from the non-pocket side first and take my zipper panel so that I can orient it correctly in the bag. For the zipper to open from left to right, when this side is facing me, I need to place the zipper panel with the teeth side down on the exterior and the tail to my right. Going to line up those center marks and clip that panel in place. You also want to check that the spacing is the same on either side of your zipper. Then we will baste that in place. There are quite a few layers here, particularly where the handle is attached, so I'm just going to take it slowly and use my hump jumper to help with my stitches as I go over that bulk. Just basting in place at 1/8 of an inch. With this side basted in place, we're going to repeat for the other side. Again, lining up those center marks, making sure that the zipper teeth are facing down, that the tails are pointing in the same direction. We've got our zipper panel centered on our exterior panel. And once it is clipped in place, we will check that the distance from each end of the zipper panel is even on both sides of the bag. And then I will baste this one in place also. With both zipper panels basted in place, we can now trim away the extra bulk from these seams here. Trimming away the bulk from the seam where the top trim joins to the main exterior panel, being careful not to cut any of your lines of stitches. Then we can set the exterior aside and move on to pack 4. Take your pack 4 pieces and first of all, working with the slip pocket piece, turn it so it is right side down. If you're using a directional fabric, you want the bottom of your print to be on the right hand side. Take your ruler, draw a line 8 inches from the top of your slip pocket. Draw a second line 6.5 inches below that line. Turn your slip pocket so it is right side up and fold the top edge over on the first line that we drew. And press that fold in place. Turn your pocket piece back over so that your folded edge is here on the left-hand side and you have the second line that you drew in front of you. We're now going to fold the bottom half of the pocket over on the second line that we drew. It can be a little tricky to see, so you can use your cutting mat as a guide so you know where that line is. I like to press it lightly in place first and then fold it back out to check my placement. Then press that in place. This is the bottom of the pocket and this is the top of the pocket with an opening there in the middle. You have 3 layers with the 2 folds. We need to top stitch the top part of the slip pocket. To do that without sewing through the back part of the slip pocket, we're going to unfold the first fold that we made. And we're going to sew along this edge at 1/8 of an inch. Back stitching in the seam allowance using a longer stitch length and top stitching at 1/8 of an inch along that upper edge of the slip pocket fold. With that edge of the slip pocket now top stitched, we can fold this layer back up. And now we will clip our side panels on. Placing the side panel right side down, we're lining up the raw edge of the slip pocket with the straight edge of the side panel and clip that in place. Make sure that you have mirrored side panels. Just make sure that the slip pocket opening is at the top. We're going to go and sew these side panels on at 3/8 of an inch. And repeat on the other side. Trim the seam allowance of just the side panels, not the center panel, as well as any stray threads. Then press open the side panels. And then we will top stitch down these 2 sides here. Back stitching within the same line as the top stitching, as we will be trimming some bulk here. Using your longest stitch length and a seam allowance of 1/8 of an inch and sewing along the side panel there. And repeat to the other side. Trim the bulk from the seam allowance at this top corner and at the bottom without cutting through any of your top stitching. Then set aside your completed slip pocket and grab your pack 5 pieces. Working now with your pack 5, you will need the 2 zippered pocket lining pieces. One is a square and one is slightly shorter. Take the longer of those 2 pieces and you're going to place your zipper with the wrong side down on top of that lining piece. And you can clip this in place, or you can use double-sided tape to place that. Your zipper is wider than your pocket piece, so just center that up on the longer of those lining pieces. And we will then sew this at 1/8 of an inch. Just basting that zipper to the longer of the lining pieces. We're now going to sew the shorter of the lining pieces to the other side of the zipper. Place double-sided tape or use your clips to center the other raw edge of your zipper on the long edge of the second lining piece. You may find that it is easier to work from the back so that you can line up your edges more easily. When you're happy with that placement, we'll go back over to the sewing machine and baste this side of the zipper also, sewing through the zipper tape and the shorter of the lining pieces. Take your zipper pocket lining and you're going to fold it so that the shorter lining piece and the zipper are laying on one side and the longer lining piece is laying on the other side, leaving just a small gap at the end. We're then going to clip or use double-sided tape to place this zipper raw edge to the bottom edge of our pocket backing. And center that zipper pocket on that backing piece. It is narrower, so just center that on that piece. Check again that you just have that slight overlap there, and at this point you have the pocket backing, this being the bottom of that pocket backing, the zipper, one pocket lining, and the second pocket lining. And then we're going to go and sew this zipper in place. Sew the zipper to the pocket backing at 3/8 of an inch. Starting from the edge of the pocket backing and sewing all the way across to the other edge, back stitching at the beginning and the end. With this seam sewn, we're now going to turn our zipper pocket around and pull the lining piece down to the front. Smooth this seam, folding open the back pocket lining. Then, feeling where the zipper tape edge is, you're going to fold that pocket lining around the edge of that zipper tape and pull it underneath the zipper pocket. Smooth that out and press this fold here that is wrapped around the edge of that zipper. We are now going to go and top stitch 2 lines of stitches, one along the usual top stitch line that you would do for a zipper installation, and then a second top stitch line, which is the top of the second slip pocket. You can start your top stitching with either the slip pocket edge or the zipper pocket edge, back stitching and sewing at a longer stitch length, 1/8 of an inch from this edge and then 1/8 of an inch from this edge. I'm going to turn in the seam allowance so that I don't have to back stitch again. Come around and top stitch next to that zipper tape, keeping this pocket lining out of the way. And then back stitching. With that top stitching done, we're now going to attach the front zipper pocket piece. Place it face up on your surface. And if you did want to place a tag, you can go ahead and do that now. Take the lower edge of that zipper and fold it up out of the way of the slip pocket lining and these two zipper pocket lining pieces. So you're just working with this lining piece and the zipper. And we're going to center that up at the top edge being one of the shorter edges. Line up the two edges here and then clip, pin, or use double-sided tape to keep those layers secured. Check that you're happy with your placement. I like to check from both sides that they're lined up so that if there's any parts of the edges that are not quite flush, I can move the material before I sew it in place. Lining up these edges of the two purple pieces of mine. And we're then going to go and sew along this upper edge at 3/8 of an inch. We're sewing through one of the lining pieces, the zipper tape, and the zipper front, the zipper pocket front. Using a shorter stitch length at 3/8 of an inch. Making sure to back stitch and keeping those edges lined up. Check to make sure that you have all of your orientations correct by doing a mock-up of what your slip pocket and your zip pocket will look like. Folding your lining pieces down, smooth that zipper pocket out, and fold up the back of your pocket. So you will have the slip pocket here, your two lining pieces for your zipper pocket, and then the front part of your zipper pocket. If you're happy with how the construction is, we can then go and top stitch along the bottom part of that zipper. We need to move all of these layers out of the way, leaving just this front part of the zipper pocket and the zipper tape and that seam allowance. So to the left here, I have my slip pocket unfolded and the two zipper pocket linings, and we're going to be sewing just along this lower edge through this exterior of the zipper pocket and this section here. So just top stitching down this side of the zipper, but because of the way that I like to top stitch, I'm going to rotate this 180 degrees, and I'm now sewing from the left side. I'm going to back stitch in my seam allowance and then sew along this edge of the zipper, which is the lower edge of that zipper pocket. We now need to close up the sides of this zipper pocket. Move the piece that we just top stitched out of the way and pull forward the two lining pieces, smoothing them out so the sides line up and the bottom edge is as close to being lined up as you can get it. It may not be exact. There'll be some variation based on your stitching from your zipper install. But line those up, and then we're going to put clips along the edges here. We will not be closing up the bottom of the pocket, as the bottom of the pocket will help us when we are turning out and closing up the lining of our bag. So we have here just the two pocket lining pieces clipped, and we're going to be sewing just down the sides of that zipper pocket. When we are sewing this zipper pocket, you need to take care that you are not sewing further than where this line of stitches is. So you can pull that up out of the way, and we are just sewing below that zipper, not into the zipper tape. You can sew from either side. Just make sure that when you do, you're not sewing too far up into your zipper tape. Back stitching well at the bottom and using a shorter stitch length and a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. Making sure to stop short of that zipper. And repeat on the other side, keeping those lining pieces nicely smoothed out. As you can see, there is that small gap there, which allows us to get our zipper pulls on. Trim your threads and also trim your seam allowance on the side of your zipper pocket. We now need to slide on our zipper pull. You can decide if you want your zipper pocket to open from the left side or the right side. I prefer mine to open from the left. Go to the end of your zipper and take a look and see which tooth is sticking further out. For mine, the left side is sticking further out. I'm going to open that zipper up about 1.5 inches and slide my pull first on the left side and pinch it in place. Then take the right side and feed it up into the zipper head. Looking from the end, I'm then going to slide the left side down until I feel it click into place with the right side, and then push the base of that zipper on. Check that the teeth are lined up without any gaps, and that the side that you started from, for me, the left-hand side, is still the tooth that is further out. When you're happy with your alignment, taking care of this lining of your zipper pocket, slide that pull to the middle. Smooth your pocket piece out, making sure that your slip pocket is nice and flat. And grab your 2 remaining side lining pieces. Place the straight edge of your side lining piece, right sides together, with the long edge of your zipper slip pocket combo. And clip that in place. And we will be sewing through all of the layers of the center section and this side lining piece at 3/8 of an inch. Just to clarify here, we are not sewing through the zipper pocket lining. We are just sewing through the side piece and the slip pocket piece and the zipper front pocket. And the zipper pocket exterior. Trim back the seam allowance, just the layer that is this side lining piece, leaving the zipper and slip pocket sections untouched. Then fold those open and press, and then we will top stitch down both of these sides on these side lining pieces, but we won't back stitch in the seam allowance here. We will back stitch in the line of stitches, as we will then clip the bulk here at the corner. We can now begin our final assembly, so grab your other lining piece and your exterior. Decide which lining piece you want to have as the back of your bag and which lining piece you want to have inside of the front of your bag, and place those on your exterior. Working with one side at a time. Place the top edge of your chosen lining piece, right sides together with your exterior. Lining up the raw long edges and clipping or using double-sided tape to get that into position. I like to put a clip at the edge and line up my centers. Then repeat for the other side. Placing your lining right side down on your exterior. We're then going to sew the lining piece and the bottom edge of this top trim piece with a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. Because we have here the zipper panel and the handles, it does get quite bulky, especially if you are using a domestic machine. So make sure you take it slow as you go over those bulky sections. You may need your hump jumper. You almost certainly will need your hump jumper. Or if you don't have a hump jumper, then you can use a ruler to support your presser foot or some folded up vinyl. And we'll just sew along that edge, backstitching well at the beginning and the end. If you're not using a walking foot, it's a good idea to sew with your lining side down so that the feed dogs of your sewing machine can help feed it through, which will give you a more even lining and it won't bunch up at one end or the other. It does get a little tricky here because we are working with so much material right now, not just the layers, but the fact that we have all of the components of the bag joined together. So just take your time. I find it helps if I move things off my sewing table so I have a lot more room to work. And I'm not worried about knocking anything off. Coming up to the bulkier area, my entire presser foot is on the material, but I'm still going to take it slow, and I've got my hump jumper there if I need it. And if my machine skips some stitches, I will go back and sew over those areas when I am done, rather than stopping and starting multiple times. Here, as I come back down off the handle, often the machine wants to jump off and skip a stitch, so I'm just going to put my hump jumper underneath to support it as we go past that bulk. Keeping a consistent seam allowance, and then slide that out of the way as we passed. Keep going in that middle section. Machine much happier there. Doing your best to keep the raw edges all lined up around that bulk. Coming up to the second side of the handle, I'm going to pop the hump jumper underneath at the back so that there's not a big step for my presser foot to go over. Again, taking it nice and slowly. Sewing through a lot of layers here, especially if you're working on a domestic machine. Coming around the other side, slide my hump jumper under again to support that presser foot, reduce the chances of skip stitches. But again, if you skip a stitch, you can just go back and reinforce that section when you're done. Come off that bulk, slide the hump jumper out of the way, keep going to the end. Back stitching again. And then just check your seams. And if you have any spots that you're not happy with, you can go back over those, and we'll repeat on the other side. Lining side down, taking your time, remembering that in sewing, Slow is fast. If you get it right the first time, and you don't have to seam rip or go back to make corrections, then overall your time spent will be less than if you rush through the trickier parts. Trim back this lining layer, taking care not to cut any of your lines of stitches. And don't trim through the vinyl of the top trim. Double check your seams, particularly where you've gone over any bulkier sections, to make sure that you don't have any skipped areas that you need to reinforce, particularly if you've used a domestic machine. And then fold out those linings. Press the fold nice and smooth, and then we'll be top stitching along this upper edge of our lining piece. When I top stitch, I normally like to top stitch in this orientation, where I would sew down this side, top to bottom, but because of all of the bulk of the bag, I am going to top stitch it this way. So just consider when you are doing your top stitching, the best way to get your bag under your machine, especially if you're working on a domestic, because we have so much of our constructed bag here all in one piece. We will be trimming the bulk on the back of this folded lining piece, so I will be back stitching in the line of stitches, not in the seam allowance. Although if you wanted to, you could back stitch in the seam allowance here, because we will not be trimming there. And then just top stitching through the lining and the folded seam allowance, keeping your hump jumper handy, as we will be going over that bulk of the handle and the zipper panel again. Coming up to a lot of bulk here, so I'm going to take it nice and slowly. And when your machine has skipped a stitch, you notice that there's a loop in the thread. If you're watching where you're top stitching and you see that little loop, then check the last stitch you did, because it's likely that it has skipped a stitch there. Just taking it nice and slow. I find that I'm most likely to get a skipped stitch as I come back off the bulk. So here, as we come down off that zipper panel, we watch. And there, if you saw that little loop there, that's a skip stitch. So I go back, grab my hump jumper, slide it under my presser foot, the extra support, and then I'm just going to hand crank it to try to catch that stitch that it just missed, and it's still missing it. And if I can't catch it, then I will go back and I will manually anchor that stitch from the back when I'm done with my top stitching. And repeat for the other side. The more of your presser foot that is on the bulk, the less likely it is that you're going to get the skip stitches. Coming up to that bulk again, I'm just going to slide this under for support. it nice and slowly. Oops, skipped again. Just hand cranking this just to get over the bulk. You can also switch to a bigger needle, and that can help minimize skip stitches when you've got a lot of layers that you're working with. Coming up on this last bulky section. And breathe a sigh of relief. Trim those threads and also snip the bulk at the corner here, making sure you're not cutting through any of your lines of stitches. And repeat that for the other 3 trim sections. You can also double check your top stitching to make sure that there's no skip stitches that you need to manually tack into place. And then we can start clipping together the sides of our bag. Take a couple of clips and first of all, fold your zipper tape so it is out of the way, so you do not accidentally catch it in your side seams. I like to use a mixture of clips and staples to line up my edges. The first thing that I like to do is line up the landmarks of the bag. So these side seams here, I will line up the folded edges and first place clips on either side. I'm then going to line up the lining fold and my bottom corners. We are not at this point closing up the bottom part of the lining. We will close the bottom part of the lining through the zipper pocket. Flip this over, line up the same landmarks where the lining folds over and where the top trim meets the main lining panel, the lining corner. And then we will also line up the exterior corner. And then take a look at your panels, line up the edges, and if you quilted, see if you can line up any of your lines of quilting at all. But more important than lining up your line of quilting is making sure that your panel is nice and smooth when you clip it together. Otherwise, you're going to end up with a wonky side seam on your bag. Once I've got my clips in place, I like to put a couple of staples in key parts of the bag. So for this bag, the main thing is going to be the area where the exterior panel meets the top trim. So with a clip on either side of that, I'm going to place a staple within the seam allowance, just holding these folded trim pieces together so that I get a nice even join on the side of my bag. Make sure that that staple is folded in place. And then repeat on the other side. And then do the same for where the top trim meets the lining. This is of course optional. This is just a little something that I like to do to make sure that those transitions are nicely lined up. When you're happy with the way all of your edges are lined up, if you stapled, make sure that the prongs are folded flat so that they don't get caught on your sewing machine. And we can then go and sew down this side at 3/8 of an inch and also down this side at 3/8 of an inch. Sewing with a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance and making sure to back stitch well at the bottom here. We're just going to sew straight up the side of the exterior and then the interior, and then repeat on the second side of the bag. Close up all of the side seams. If If you have used staples, just take care as you go over them to make sure the prongs are not catching. And I also like to just reinforce that seam there where there's multiple layers joined together. Note too, as you sew this lining side seam, that it is not a straight line that you're sewing. It's got a slight shape to it. Check your seams and make sure that you are happy with them. I've also added a second line of stitches in a color that matches my exterior vinyl so that that side seam will have less visible stitches there. We'll then remove our staples and trim our seam allowances. Leave the bulk of the upper trim section with the seam allowances intact. Grab your pack 6 pieces. If you are not doing the decorative connectors, you can skip through this part. If you are doing the decorative connectors, then take your connector piece and choose which end is going to be the end that is anchored at the bottom and which end is going to be clipped to the exterior of your bag. Working from the bottom corner, decide where you would like to place your connector. You can choose if you want to have it on the front or the back of that bottom seam. And you're just going to clip that in place with the raw end lined up with the raw end of that boxed corner. And the same on the other side, clipping it to the side. What we're now going to do is clip the rest of that boxed bottom. If you would like, you can pop a little staple in to that decorative connector there just to keep that in position. And then place clips along that bottom corner of the bag, lining up the flat edge of the base with the flat bottom of the side of the bag. And do the same on the other side. Using a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance, we are now going to sew this boxed corner closed, back stitching at the beginning and the end, and also reinforcing where the connector piece is in the middle of that seam if you use the decorative connector on your bag. Doing your best to keep the edge of your base lined up with the flat bottom of the side of your bag. I'm going to sew all the way across the first time and then sew a second time reinforcing that connector, and that will just keep those layers lined up while I continue to work. And repeat on the other side. You may find that it's easier to get the base and the side of your bag to line up better if you sew with the main part of the bag up as opposed to the base up, or you may find the opposite to be true. Do not be afraid to try both ways so that you get the best possible bottom seam on your base that you can. And then reinforcing over that connector if you have placed one. Trim your threads, remove any staples that are still in place, and then also trim the seam allowance in the base here, but not at the side seam. We're now going to turn the entire bag right side out through the opening in the bottom of the lining. I like to take this opportunity to just give the bag a look over, check all of my seams, check all of my pockets are open, that I haven't accidentally sewn any pockets closed. Open up this zipper here, check that your slip pockets are actually pockets and not just pretty sewing on the inside of your bag. Check your exterior slip pocket. And if you're happy with that, and you did the decorative connectors, we will now place the screw-in D-rings for those to attach to. And if you did not do the decorative connectors, then you can move on to the next step. Take your swivel hook and a rivet set, and you're just going to slide the swivel over that decorative connector, fold the end over, and then we will punch the hole for and place our rivet in this section at the end of that decorative connector. Then set that rivet, take your swivel and attach it to the screw-on D-ring. And then lay that on the side of your bag to get an idea of where the placement should be. You can choose if you want to attach it on the same side as you anchored the bottom or on the opposite side. I'm going to do the opposite side for mine. Looking at the side of your bag with that D-ring connected, just decide whereabouts you would like that to sit. So I'm going to put mine just below the stitch line there. And I've just made a mark there, so I will punch a hole so that I can attach that D-ring. The punch I usually use for my rivets will not reach in here, and while I do have one of the long arm punches, I am not going to use that today. Just going to use my awl. Being careful on the back to make sure that my fingers are not going to get stabbed. I'm just going to poke through that mark, making sure I'm only going through the exterior layer. And then I will just gradually make that hole bigger so that it can accommodate the screw for my D-ring. I like to check the hole from the outside to make sure that it is big enough. I'm just going to grab my seam ripper and just make it a tiny, tiny bit bigger since the screw is quite big. Just very gently. Once you've got that hole big enough, you can place your screw. I like to add a few layers of vinyl if there is a gap between the screw and the connector there, just to give it some support from the back. Then use some thread locker and then cover it up with some duct tape. Just have 3 folded over layers of vinyl there that I'll punch a hole in. And that will act not only to support that screw, but also to fill in any gap there between the screw and the exterior of the bag. Put a tiny drop of thread locker inside of your swivel, being very careful not to overflow so that you don't get it on the exterior of your bag, keeping your hands clean. And then just pop that on to the screw from the front and then tighten it from the back. And cover the back of that with some duct tape. And then repeat on the other side. With those decorative connectors in place, we can now move on to closing up the rest of the bag. Open up your lining. We're going to go to the inside of the bag and we're going to fold out the seam allowance of the top trim piece. If you're not planning to top stitch your finished bag, then you can stick some double-sided tape in the seam allowance to hold that down. If you are going to top stitch your finished bag, then you may want to omit the double-sided tape, or if you think that your machine can handle sewing through it and you want to use it, then go right ahead. Just press that open and repeat on the other side. We now need to close up the bottom of our lining. We're going to do that through this zipper pocket. Pull out the pocket lining and then pull the entire lining piece through that bottom open section of the zipper pocket. Line up and clip together the bottom seams of your lining. I like to line up the seams here where we folded over the sides of the lining pieces, and also line up the corner, and then work my way towards the middle. We can then sew this bottom seam of the bag lining closed at 3/8 of an inch. Just sew straight along that bottom edge at 3/8 of an inch, back stitching at the beginning and at the end. Because we've pulled the lining through the pocket and it is bunched up here, you may just need to encourage it to stay straight so that you can sew that bottom seam parallel to the fabric edge. We now need to clip our boxed corners so that we can close up the last part of the lining. Take your corner, pulling the lining through a little further, and line up the seam on the side of the lining and the seam on the bottom of the lining. You can line them up by opening out your seam allowances, or you can push them to opposite sides and then nest them together. I like to put a clip in the middle first and then pull on the side to get the edges to line up, and they should line up nice and flat. If you pop an extra clip at the side here, that will help keep that edge lined up. Repeat on the other side. And then again for the second corner. Make sure when you clip the second corner that your bottom seam, if you folded it, is folding the same way so that you don't get a twist in your bottom seam that can cause some bulk inside of your bag. And then we're going to sew along this bottom corner at 3/8 of an inch, working to keep it nice and flat so that we have a flat corner and a flat base in our bag. Back stitching at both the beginning and the end, and repeat for the other corner. Reinforce that seam if you wish. Continue all the way to the end, and we can trim all of these loose threads. Trim any loose threads. And make sure any clips are removed. And we're then going to tuck our lining back through that zipper pocket. For the moment, I'm going to tuck the zipper pocket back in while I check to make sure that the lining sits into my bag properly and that everything is the way it should be. Check that those seam allowances are open at the side here. So that is where we will be putting our connectors on. And it does get a little bulky. And then you can pull that zipper pocket lining out again. And we can fold in a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance and clip that and then sew it closed. With the raw edges folded in, we're now going to sew along the bottom of the zipper pocket at 1/8 of an inch. This is not a basting stitch. You're going to use your shorter stitch length for this, and make sure that you are back stitching at the beginning and at the end. Finish up those threads and then tuck in that lining pocket. And put your lining all the way back into your bag. If you want to top stitch your bag, you would go ahead and do that now, top stitching around this upper edge at 1/8 of an inch. I'm not going to top stitch this bag, so I'm going to move on now to putting on my zipper pull. Take off those clips and grab your zipper pull. Looking at your zipper, slide the pull on from the side that you marked if you placed the mark earlier, and pinch the zipper between your thumb and forefinger, holding the zipper teeth into the side of the zipper pull, but with the zipper teeth still within the zipper pull itself. Then take the other side of your zipper and slide it up until you feel them touch. And when they touch, hold the left side in your fingers, or the second side if you started on the left side, and then slide the first side down until they click together. Then push on the base of the zipper head until it catches, and then slide it to the end. Check now that the teeth have no gaps at this end and that the side that you wanted to start on is correct, and check the other end and make sure that they line up. If they don't line up properly at this end, pull your zipper pull all the way off and start again, adjusting at this end for the difference at this end here. But mine lines up, so I'm ready to proceed with putting on my zipper end cap. Grab some double-sided tape and place it at the end of your zipper, making sure that your pull is on. Peel it off and then fold one side over the zipper teeth and then the other side on top of that to create a small end there that you can then tuck into your end cap. Slide that on and then place the screw. The same as I did for the decorative connectors, I'm going to put a small amount of thread locker to keep that screw in place, noting that this zipper tape here will absorb the thread locker and it is red and it will discolor it. So I'm just going to put just the tiniest little bit in there to lock that screw in place but not stain the zipper itself. Just using my scissors there to hold that in place. Take your rivets, a ruler, your punch, and a pen, and we're going to mark the placement for these rivets. Line your ruler up with the top edge of the bag and the inside edge of your handle. And you are going to place a mark that is 3/4 of an inch from the upper edge and 3/4 of an inch in from the edge of the handle. And then you're going to place a second mark in the same line, 3/4 of an inch from this edge and 1 3/4 of an inch from the edge of the handle. You're going to repeat that for all 4 anchor spots of the handles. You may find that it is easier to work from this side, but the placement is the same. Take your punch, and we're going to be punching a hole through the folded over top trim and the handle piece, but not the zipper panel. You may find it helps to just push the zipper panel down out of the way so that you don't accidentally include that in your layers. Punching a total of 8 holes. Grab your rivets, place them in the holes that we just punched at the base of each handle attachment. And set those in place. We're now going to attach our D-rings. Set the bag aside for the moment and grab your connector pieces, your D-rings, and 8 sets of rivets. You will also need a ruler, a pen, and your punch. Grab some double-sided tape and place it at the taped end of the upper connector. Peel the backing away and fold that over to about where the taped part ends. On mine, it's about 7/8 of an inch. I try to match mine up so that they are the same. Fold them again so that the ends meet and hold it in place with a clip. We're now going to mark our rivet placement. Grab your ruler and measuring up from the end that opens out, not this folded end, you're going to measure 1/4 of an inch up and 1/4 of an inch in from either side and make a mark. You're going to make a second set of marks that is 1 1/4 of an inch up, so 1 inch further up than the first mark, and again 1/4 of an inch in from the edge, which will line up with the first mark that we made. Repeat that on the second connector. 1/4 of an inch up, 1/4 of an inch in from either side, working from the open end, and then 1 inch further up from that, or 1 1/4 inch up from this end, lined up with these 2 marks, also 1/4 of an inch in from the edge. Once you're happy with those measurements, and I like to check them next to each other so that I could tell quickly if I have one that is off, you can punch the holes through all of the layers. At the bottom here, you're going to be punching through 3 layers. At the top here, it's the 2 folded layers. Grab one of your connectors and your bag and slide on the D-ring. Fold the connector with the D-ring in place over the side seam of your bag and position it the way you would like it to sit on your finished bag. Center it up over that side seam on the front and the back, and then use a clip to hold it in place. It does get a little bulky at this point. When you're happy with that placement, take your pen and you're just going to mark the holes for the rivets in the trim piece. And then when you have those holes marked, punch those also with your hole punch. When you're placing your rivets, I find that it is easier to go from the back. So I like to place my rivets through the back part of my connector first, and then through my bag, and then put the caps on from the front. This is one of the trickier parts of this bag for me because of the layers. So make sure your rivets are long enough. And poke those through. You're going around the bulk of that side seam. With the D-ring in place, bring the connector over to the top and slide it over the stud pieces. And once you've got it over, you're going to pop your cap on in all 4 sections. And then set those rivets in place. And repeat that for the other side. Now we can get our positioning correct. Close up your zipper. And looking at your bag, make sure your handles are turned out so that they curve under and up towards the top. And there you have your finished Coupeville tote. Hope that helps. Thanks, everyone.